I'd like to thank the people who help sponsor our events, which is Epson, Photo Shelter, American Photography, and Pro Photo Daily. Again, we ask you to, if you have any questions, you can put them into the chat room. We do ask you again to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And tonight we have two terrific photographers, Nany Farese and Liam Sharp, who is going to start us off. So, Liam, you take over. It's all yours.
Let's see which, here we go. Play. Good. So I wanted to show tonight because basically I wanted to show some new work that I've been doing in Coney Island and the beaches of England. But I decided, in putting together the presentation, that I should sort of put some context. So I started out putting some of my other work together. And so I'm going to try and move fairly quickly through this. But when whenever I show work, I find that I generally don't get very much comments or feedback from people. So, so please, if you have anything to say, and Frank said to me initially, be careful what you ask for. Anyways, we're going to start out. But let me basically start by saying that as a photographer, I've been doing commercial work for years, and we're always we always deal with the same sort of visual language that I find, which is sort of people smiling, having the time of their life, and so on. And that's at least been my work, right? Doing corporate work, doing medical work, so on and so forth. And so, in contrast to that, my personal work is kind of the polar opposite of that. And so, I'm more interested. I guess I'm more interested in sort of the wider human spectrum of our humanity, and not necessarily the commercial what sells, but really who we are as people and how we express ourselves and how we express our humanity. And so when I work, I basically when I'm working, so I'm going to start with myself, because everything I do in these portraits, I'm prepared to do to myself. And so I've done, during the pandemic, I did this series of self-portraits, which then inspired this portrait, which was the intent. And I did this just after the pandemic.
I can't hear you. No.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. That's somebody else.
Okay. So I'm going to start with Ebola survivors. So basically, I've done a lot of work for Wired magazine out of the UK, and I sort of became their kind of go-to guy for these kind of human stories. And so they sent me, this is a body of work that I started, that was actually shot in Liberia just after the pandemic, where we basically were shooting survivors. And so we set up in a clinic, and we basically shot over 100 portraits in 2 days. And the key with what's really important to me is essentially, Wired is very much a sort of highly produced magazine. So the lighting and the production values have to be there. But also, for me, it's about the humanity. And so in this case, it was very much photographing people that had literally just survived from Ebola. Let's see, it's saying it's not moving forward. There we go. So this was shot in Ethiopia. And I initially went to Ethiopia, I think around 2004. So this is from that time. And at that time, basically, the Oma Valley region was very much separated from the rest of Ethiopia. The army and the police didn't go down there because predominantly the tribes had been warring forever. And so it was kind of a no-go zone. And we basically traveled 7 days on rough roads, basically, to get to this region. And this looks like a child soldier, but it isn't, because basically the tribes are out fighting the other tribes, and so all that's left essentially is the children and the older men. So what I love doing in a lot of my work is I love basically setting up a studio in those real environments, and then lighting those situations as if they were in the studio. So when you look at them, they look like they're within a studio in New York or wherever. But in fact, when I'm photographing them, they're still very much in their context. So you have basically everything is intact from that perspective. So that, again, that humanity. So these I shot on black velvet, clipped to the side, that's sort of the gasoline rack at the side of the top of the car. But very much trying to capture sort of the essence of these people, but out of context, which I find really interesting. Again, shooting for Wired in Kenya, inspired by, there's a photographer, I think his name is Brent. I remember coming to an ASNP lecture, and he had done this series of incredibly produced portraits, animal portraits, where he set up sort of these cameras in these environments and then built sets around these the shots of the animals that were essentially these urban environments. So having shot in Kenya and a number of times, I got to know a Maasai chief. And so I made arrangements for shooting in another part of Kenya. And I came over and basically got 12 warriors in this bus. And then we went around basically finding these urban environments. And so the idea was really that, because tribes are also under threat, just like animals. And, you know, even though so we're all worried about the animals, but really, these tribes are also being encroached on, their lands and their traditions and so on. So I wanted to sort of create sort of a photo story. Another thing that I find shooting in these sort of remote areas, especially with tribal regions, is that missionaries are always there, and to a certain extent, they also threaten, are part of how tribes, because part of being converted is that they want them to dress in normal clothing and send their kids to school and so on, basically, which doesn't sound bad, but essentially it means that they lose touch with their original. So First Nations are basically American Indians, and the Canadian version, essentially. And so I used to live in Canada, now I live in the States, but very much the First Nations, the whole concept of universality in Canada is basically that we, pay high taxes, but everybody should have the basic same level of funding on education, healthcare, government services. And so that's just not the case. And I was surprised at that. Sort of as a Canadian, I was talking to this person that was running this Child and Family Caring Society, which actually was I didn't realize was putting a human rights case in the UN and also against the Canadian government to basically fight for equal funding for First Nations kids, and also in greater context, First Nations. And so she asked me to go to the far north. And in a lot of these cases, these communities are in 1,000 kilometers, whatever miles, but very, very remote. A lot of times it's more expensive to fly in and out of those communities than anywhere else in the world. So these people are very isolated. And because of that, they deal with very harsh conditions that Canadians are just not aware of. And so we went up basically, and I traveled across the country into three provinces, and we did a whole series of portraits. And
Liam, how do you facilitate the getting there and knowing that people are there? I mean, is that a piece of the research that you do, or the magazines, or the clients? Like, how do you know that there are people, that far away off the grid?
Well, these are very much, you can't just go into these communities. I mean, it's very much, there's,
right.
The First Nations people are really angry at the rest of Canadians, and rightly so, And so because I was actually traveling with this person that was actually bringing the fight to the UN and bringing the fight basically to the Canadian government. And I was really there to help. And essentially what I made a deal with them that I would any usage from the pictures, I would redirect any request for usage, any monies would go back to them. And so I've never used them commercially. And so some of this work is actually in the Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg. And really the crux of this work, I think, helped me get my green card really in the States, because you have to basically demonstrate that you're doing something more than just the regular practice, and you're actually helping society in some way. And so that was my way of doing that, to be able to demonstrate that.
And do these folks have the same, sort of issues that American Indians have, with drugs and poverty and all those.
Absolutely, absolutely, very, very, very much so. And the living conditions. Part of the problem is that all the housing is really provided for them, and because it's a reserve, right? And so they have no real sense of pride in ownership. And so you sort of go there saying nobody's coming to fix my house, and you sort of think, well, why don't you just fix your house yourself, right? And so but a lot of times they want a new house, and what they'll do is burn down the house, and so that so it's a real kind of vicious cycle, essentially. It's not just a clear cut. You sort of think, well, the government should do more, and so on and so forth. But it's just a bad situation, really, overall. But at the same time, very much so. So I went back again for Canadian Geographic, which is the equivalent of National Geographic, back, having done this work, got a completely different reception because I'm now no longer with this person or with this organization, but again, had to come up with a solution of how do I demonstrate some of these issues. And so in this case, what we did is I brought a sign, and we had them write down some of the issues that they were, that they had to, that they were dealing with, that they wanted basically Canadians to know about. So Cuba, I'm just giving you kind of an overview of some of the work that I've done. Cuba is obviously an incredible place to photograph. I mean, from the humanity standpoint. I mean, in the sense that, there's nothing in the stores, there's no billboards, just all the things that kind of motivate us from a commercial standpoint are just aren't there. So you're kind of left with this kind of humanity that's just so concentrated. And so what I'm a portrait photographer, and so as crazy as it might seem, and this is, I think, what I hope kind of, gives, this is what I contribute. This is why, because I'm always looking, I don't do the same as everybody else. And so what I did is I brought 5 lights with me, set them up on the street, and basically did a sort of studio lighting setup, literally on the street. So did these kind of studio portraits, but literally on the street, of these individuals. But it's just really about access.
And Liam, before you go, do you know where you're shooting and who you're shooting? Do you have a fixer? What gets you to that boxing club?
Well, the great thing about the boxing club is that I remember going there, I think, what do I want to shoot? And you can come up with ideas in Cuba and actually make it happen. So I decided that I was going to go and shoot at the Olympic team of the Cuban national boxing Olympic team. Now, if you came to the States and said, I want to shoot the US, Olympic team, and you have a week, there's no way you can do it. But, in Cuba, $50 here, $50 there, and you can kind of do that. I mean, but that's sad. That's what's wrong with the place, in a sense, because essentially, when I was there, when I was doing this, mostly, the average salary, I think, was like $20 a month or something like that. So if you go in and, so it's because of the poverty, but you can basically, for me, I don't speak Spanish. So the fixer or the translator, and, a lot of time what would happen is I would get a translator, somebody, and it would be a student or somebody would recommend somebody and so on. But invariably within 2 or 3 days, they would get spooked, because essentially if you go into people's houses, the people are watching, and they know after time that, it's going to affect them, and the police are going to come and visit and stuff like, this is just basic stuff we're doing here, right? So, so I'd have to get a new person, but, and, I've had real issues there for that reason, mainly because of the communist government, in the sense of not wanting to have photography, especially when they see professional photography, they think that you're part of a news or a media organization, and that you're going to basically spread sort of propaganda of poverty and so on, and they don't want that. So, so a lot of times you have to kind of, so I had issues on the street, and last time I did it on the street when I was there, but I started to actually go into people's homes and photograph because of that reason. But so I guess there's something about what I love doing is really photographing sort of real people, and in context. But even though these are in context, they look like they're not, but they are, right? So, but again, it's always the sense, I'm always trying to capture the humanity. I was sort of thinking, the process that I go through, and the process that I go through is, commercially, I'm always sort of, kind of trying to get people to smile and laugh and sort of inject this sort of happiness and this joy and so on and so forth. And so in contrast to this, I usually say absolutely hardly anything to these people. And it's just amazing with that quietness how people come to you and their humanity comes to you.
But so Liam, so this is what you show on your website, right? But this is what this is no. So do clients see this work and that's what gets you the commercial work?
No, that's the point. I never show this ever because because I'm afraid they're not going to read it right. I mean, maybe because I spent too much time in Canada and it's just the bandwidth of what they you have to show literally what they want, and so if I show this, they won't, or because most of the people making the decisions, so I never ever show this. I show exactly what they want to hire me for, and that's how I get work. So this would not get me work. This would totally not get me work. So I did this next series of pictures, and mostly shot in a drag clubs in Toronto. But what really was the driving force, the motivator for this work was essentially what is beauty? And I just sort of noticed that, what is beauty, right? So to some people, a bodybuilder, beauty might be, being very muscular. To a beauty pageant, it might be something else. To a drag queen, it's something else. And so I just sort of started to explore what the concept of beauty was, right? And so even though the pictures might look like they're, kind of ugly, they're not. I mean, the intent was basically beauty. What was beauty? So what I did is I went to this drag club in Toronto and set up this little studio with a friend of mine who's actually watching tonight. And we, again, lighting and so on and so forth, and then shot these performers just literally when they came off stage. And so you would get sort of this very much this sort of realness again that would come through. So again, the concept of beauty. So what I did is I had this other idea as far as exploring beauty is I wanted to go to a nudist camp. So in the sense of when you strip away clothes and then you're faced with sort of people's humanity again without the trappings of clothes and all that, what that implies. And so I did this series of portraits, went to this nudist, set up again this little studio. And now you can see why I wouldn't show this to a client. This work, but when after being there for a few days, it's just and you stop seeing the fact that people are naked and obviously just see the people, and so it's just this sort of the same kind of process. So I thought I would show some portraits. So Wired magazine again, poacher, and this guy, is he's now a park ranger. That's why I'm able to photograph him. And so I went to photographing about the technology and how to combat poaching in Kenya. And so it's just again about allowing the story to be told through the eyes or through the presence of the person, and in this case, sort of the killer instinct. A friend. This is for the Times magazine in London. It was the 7/7 survivors, and something about when people you create a situation where you're in a photo shoot and essentially you have people share this kind of emotion with you. It's kind of a privilege, really, and it's always, for me, it's always a debate. Do you keep shooting, which sort of seems like the wrong thing to do, or do you or do you stop and carry on the conversation? So these are some additional portraits.
Can you tell us why that young woman was crying?
Yeah, I can. She's a survivor of the 7/7 terrorist attacks in London. So when I say 7/7, that's 2007, July 7th, 2000. So 7/7/7, I think. And so, the odd thing is I found out after she was a lawyer that actually was representing all the victims and with a big lawsuit. So in some ways, I think, the backstory is, did she cry because she wanted a powerful portrait to be able to demonstrate, the emotion and the struggle, at least, the impact that the terrorist attacks were having on her clients? I question that. But that's why she was crying, because we were talking about the horror that happened during that event.
Was that the one where there were two in one day? The bus
That's right. That's right.
and the train station?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I missed a train in the morning, and 2 weeks later there was another attack, and I was back by one train as well. So it was pretty close, yeah, to me as well. I obviously I wasn't affected directly, but this is William King. I don't know if he's here tonight, but a lighting test with him, just in case he was. I thought I'd throw this in. So again, going to the situation where these things exist at a bee festival. So are there any questions or feedback of what I've shown?
Yeah, no, everyone's loving, the depth that you're in with your subjects. Yeah, very much. You'll check when you're off later. You'll check the chat room. You'll see.
Okay. So now I'm getting into what I kind of wanted to show. So this is Coney. So this is the first kind of, I've done 3 different projects concerning the beach, so to speak. And why the beach? I mean, Frank, you grew up close to Coney Island. The thing was, when I was in Coney Island, I would go there a lot because I don't live that far from there. But there's so many photographers, and the last thing I want to do is do exactly the same as every photographer, right? So I would sit there and watch photographers, and I'm not going to pick up my camera. I don't want to shoot the same thing. So, but I was lying on the beach, and I noticed literally lying flat on the beach that the horizon line was in the right place. And then what I realized when these characters were at this kind of position that the background, if I blurred out the background, and then the edge of the sea would become like my studio. So for me, when I was shooting it was like my studio. So I was doing portrait photography, but basically shooting it as if it was a studio. So what I would do, same thing, lighting's important. So I would go there every time at noon, shoot for an hour. Sun was in the same position, and then basically shoot people. And the thing is that what's amazing about Coney Island again is that you get, I don't know if it's 4 or 3 subway lines that terminate literally at Coney Island. You come out onto the beach, the piers there, they stay generally within that 500 feet. So there's a span where basically all these people pour out, and there's this concentration of New Yorkers, and New Yorkers that I would never walk up to this guy in his hood and ask to photograph him. But somehow, in this kind of context, I realized that within the beach context, where people sort of outside their neighborhoods, they're sitting on the beach, kind of not much going on, they're accessible. So I just kind of went crazy, and then basically shot for about a month and a half and did like an amazing amount of portraits, basically in the same kind of exactly the same way, same way of doing it. So I don't want to show too many of these. This was Portrait of Humanity in Britain. So I entered, and this was shortlisted, which really means you're in the book, right? So they have 200 shortlists that they publish a book. And this one was also in that book. I think I was the only person in that book that had 2 portraits in the same short.
So Liam, that leads right into a question I had. So you don't show this work, right?
No.
Okay. So
I have showed it. I mean, I showed it to I showed it at some, APA last year. I was in there.
Right. But at the same time, you lament about shooting portraits of people smiling and happy in your commercial work.
I make money doing that. That's what people want. So that
Liam, you got to let me finish the question.
Okay.
So you're not showing it. You lament about doing smiley work and smiley portraits. Do you think if you showed this work, you would get work that represents this type of work, like you do in the editorial space, that there's commercial space around, whatever product you think or whatever client you could go after? Showing this work may lend itself to getting that work.
That's true. I mean, I do feel I have a certain ability to actually capture something here. And
Yeah.
so I think there is some value in that.
And just so you know, a creative director who's now on watching you, Glenn Backen, said I was dead on right. Just so you know.
Okay. Okay.
So showing Glenn this work is a good thing.
Okay. Okay. So last year, England, brilliant weather, was there for the summer. Wanted to do, I'm not in Coney Island, want to do more of this. So I figure out I'm going to go again to a similar situation, to a working class beach. And the thing about Britain, which is really kind of cool, is that, in the subway, you have, whenever I travel in the subway, it kind of reflects the neighborhood above. So you look who's on the subway car, effectively reflects the neighborhood above. Well, Britain, 50 miles. Nobody's further away from the seaside, 50 miles, right? So for me, like the seaside coast is kind of like the subway. It kind of reflects, the communities that are within a 50-mile range of the seaside. So wanted to go and photograph working class, not so much working, real people, the real Brits, not the ones from London, not the tourists, whatever it is, right? The real Brits. And, and somehow, the working class Brits, to me, have that sort of vulnerability or something. This humanity is really there. And so I went to a place called Skegness and photographed there, and unbelievable place. I could not believe it, and went 2 or 3 times. And first of all, this ended up in Portrait of Britain last year. So this was part of the Portrait of Britain. So the same thing, shortlisted 1 to 200. But you sort of get that kind of determination. The kid with the ice cream, and so what I wanted to do was something different. Again, I don't want to do the same thing as I did the thing in Coney Island. So what I did is I basically kind of came in closer, and I didn't focus necessarily directly on the beach. So now this is more about the people. And so I'm photographing the people and the individuals, and trying to capture what I see. And there's characters, that I find, and there's sort of a sense of humanity that comes through, and toughness to a certain extent. So same thing, lighting, out of focus background. But it's the same sort of thing, approaching people, but also approaching this humanity. And
what kind of lighting are you using for these situations?
Well, I'm not doing the Cuba thing of 5 lights. I'm doing the one light like I did in Coney Island. But it's about balance, right? So it's about using the sun as your second source, right? So, and it's interesting. I played around with that, and you get, so I'm only using one head, and I played around with different reflectors. And I've recently been working with a much harder reflector, which is more interesting.
Yeah, Liam, and why use this background and not the white background?
Well, part of it is the practicality of it all. I mean, okay. Essentially, the thing with this, what works with this is that I'm shooting extremely quickly. First of all, I know my light really well, and 2, I am shooting so that they don't have a time to react, and so and people don't want to, so they agree, and I basically I shoot fast, rapid, 1, 2, 3, like I'm done, and so. And I move on. And so part of that is I end up getting kind of raw, more honest pictures, but it's also part of the practicality. I mean, somebody's on the beach. Last thing, you don't want to stand out on the beach with some guy with a background and trying to, legalities of, the police coming and giving you a hard time. So it's not necessarily, so it's about being really quick with this.
And I got to tell you, the way you describe your work,
yeah.
You describe this to a client, an art director, creative director, they will just melt in your hands, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for exactly this real, like getting the real essence, like you say all the time, the essence of the people.
Right.
That's what creative directors, dying for, reality, you
Right.
know.
Right.
So you got to rethink yourself.
No, I know. I mean, part of what I've been doing recently commercially, which is kind of interesting, and it's been working because I've been doing healthcare, like hospitals, real day in the life situations, but I'm
Yeah.
lighting it at the same time. So the same kind of thing, sort of the reality, but also lighting it to the production value. Also doing it in schools, but again, capturing something that's real,
Yeah.
the real learning, the real caring moment, the realness, right? And not
Yeah.
being afraid to do that, but doing it in a way that I can light it and do it efficiently. So, and that's the hard part, right? And so this is now when I went back. So kind of coming in closer. So I didn't want to do. So I went back to England this year, planned it all out, going to do some more. Pick, first week of July, thinking all the schools will be out, go back to Skegness, do the same thing. I went and it was the worst weather, like 60 degrees, driving rain every day, couldn't shoot. Ended up being there for 2 weeks, shot for a day and a half. And so I literally had very little time and very frustrated. But I wanted to shoot something. So I wanted to come in closer. And then again, working with black and white instead of color. But there's really a sort of a sense of this harshness that's there, but not only harshness, this vulnerability and sort of different, shooting in Coney Island, people are tough, we're here, the working class has been pounded down forever, and the poverty is just there forever. And so there really is a different kind of vibe with the people that comes through that just isn't there in Coney Island. It isn't there in the States. When you look into these people's eyes, this sort of this in some way this resignation, this openness, this kind of it's not like it's just different, which I found quite interesting, really, in comparison. The same sort of things, shooting quickly. But really trying to capture the people at the same time, obviously.
So Liam, it's your feeling when you shoot quick like this, you're getting them before they actually think about a pose.
That's right. Oh no, yeah, it's real because I'm not giving them any direction. When you're shooting commercially, it's all about, kind of injecting this sort of yourself and trying to get that energy going. And it's kind of, we're here, they agree, they settle, and I give them no direction and I shoot bang, bang, real quick, and I'm gone. And and it's amazing how they, there's an honesty to them right off the bat, right? And it's because I haven't said anything I haven't kind of directed them. I haven't really, which I find, which is kind of, yeah, anyways, that's just how I work with these portraits. And I think, I don't know. I mean, I'm asking for feedback because I think that I'm achieving something, by doing this. I know how it feels. That's what counts, right? And that's.
Do you ever? Do you send people their portraits?
Absolutely, that's the deal. Yeah, that's the deal.
So you get their information and you send them something.
That's right. Now, part of that is, from a U.S. standpoint, you get them all released. But when I don't sell these portraits, and so I actually don't even sell them as art. So, but I do contests and things like that. So if they were to win in different contests, then I have an ability to go and follow up with them and confirm with them. But I do definitely send them not a printed portrait, but always digital files very quickly afterwards too. That's very important. There has to be something for them.
Yeah, and like you're winning, getting acknowledged in competitions. That should be another sign for you that you're doing something right. You're doing.
Yeah, no, I agree, Frank. I really do think there is something there. It's part of why I want to show this work and talk about it is because I want to get the vibe whether or not I am doing it. I don't, unless you actually show it. I just been shooting this stuff and not showing. I haven't shown it to anybody, right? All this work, right? So I don't know.
Well, when you get off and you read the chat, you'll have a recalibration in your brain for sure.
Oh, okay, that's good to know. So came back to Coney Island last year. Shot 1.5 days. It's like, geez, what am I doing? 1.5 days. But that's what I shot in 1.5 days. Still not bad, right? And but I wanted to do more, and it was still the summer, and I realized again, looking at the subway, like the coastline, that the people were very similar. Like they were still very interesting people. But so I went back to Coney Island, shot for a couple of weeks, and did a series there in the same style, in the same direction. But there's a hardness to people there. There's just not the same vulnerability. It's interesting how it's different. So this is.
Yeah, what Glenn had a nice suggestion is to put on your website your personal work, and put it in there. Put this work in there.
The thing is, it's such a contrast. There's such a big, like, it's really the polar opposite, But what? To be honest with you, Frank, I've never shown the nudists. I've never shown a lot of this work ever. I shot that many years ago. I'm getting to the point in my life, I don't give a care. I just think, I'm just going to start showing this stuff.
That's just what Glenn said. You got nothing to lose.
I have nothing to lose at this point. Like, do it. So that's kind of what I'm going to do. Because
great.
So, I mean, part of this too is that, when I talk about lighting and stuff, it's just, getting the balance. I find I'm sort of perfecting, the contrast and everything, and you can sort of see it here in the black and white is important. So these are. But again, there's this sort of toughness that's there that just wasn't there in the UK. But part of it too is I really feel like I should try and expand, not just shoot on the beach, because I'm sure there's lots of other communities or other places I could do similar work that might be interesting, where there's something to say, right? So these are more of the same.
Just beautiful.
But the light has to be there, you have to focus the light, you have to create the separation, you have to focus on the people. And without that, it's not quite the same, in my view. That's it.
Thank you. That's great. Liam, the only shot in this entire body of work that even looked like it was commercial or it looked like you were trying was the next, like maybe the fourth or fifth to the last shot, the guy with the glasses. The short guy who, he just looked like a caricature. The rest of them look so perfectly real. Really wonderful.
Oh, really? Oh, really? So the guy with the glasses with the shirt,
open shirt, right? Like he's the only one that looked like a caricature, of Coney Island, and that's fine. It's totally fine. But because everything else there is just terrific, Liam, just terrific.
Thank you.
And that's terrific too. But just talking about it, just great.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, I was attracted.
It's where I grew up
Yeah.
in Fairfax, Virginia, which was also interestingly a narrow strip of woods between two residential neighborhoods.
Oh, we can mute that guy, whoever that is.
If you touch the seeds of jewelweed, this
Yeah.
explosive thing. It kind of feels amazing, and she was the one who would show me that, or the kind of puff mushrooms that you tap and they release their spores in kind of a puff of smoke.
I don't know who that is. Jay, you can try to get that guy out or something. All right, Liam, thank you so much. That was terrific, right on time. Besides,
Good.
Great job. Great job. Now, it's really, Liam, spend time going through the chat.
I will for sure. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Now we have from San Francisco, my favorite Giant fan, which is really wonderful. Nancy. So Nancy, you share your screen and take us on a trip.
All right. So tell me.
I do want to thank Francis pronounce
Yeah.
Jakubic for helping facilitate Nancy coming on with us. So thank you, Francis.
Sure. I have this correct? Are you guys looking at my screen?
Yes, we are.
You're looking at the right. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. And Liam, super interesting to see your work. Thank you for that beautiful body of work. And I love, I'm new to projection, so it's interesting to see the value of this as place to put work out in front of people and get feedback and all of that. I really appreciate it. I want to start in maybe a bit of an atypical way, but I wanted to start talking about play because I think this will actually explain how I think about my work. And I want to start with a question, first of all, which is ask you to pause and think of a moment of childhood play. We all have those moments, and most people can go very quickly to a single time or a game or a person, a feeling. You might have felt liberated. You might have felt protected, safe, engaged, excited. Play is defined as something that we do where the singular purposes of it is to have fun. It's where you lose a sense of your ego, of yourself, and you lose a sense of time. It's timeless, it's egoless, and the purpose is to have fun. So the question then, the second question is, what do you do now where you lose track of time? In other words, are we actually playing and injecting that sort of creative function into our work every day? I hope this isn't a foreign concept because we are mostly artists here. We're certainly all creative people. And we all know that our best work is the work that we do that we're most excited about. It's where our brains are most alive. About 12 years ago, I was realizing as I was doing social documentary work that I was getting really excited or looking at kids at play. And I began to incorporate play more seriously, both as an area of photography and research and academic study, but also as a tool for productivity and creativity. And now I'm actually an advocate for play and bringing play more actively into our adult lives. And so today I thought I would show you the evolution of the work that I did, starting with some social documentary work and then getting into a body of work I did around play, and then into a body of work that is my thesis work, where I've actually really applied more actively these ideas of play, how to be more intentional about bringing it into my work. And hopefully you all leave here with some ideas or thinking about how to bring play more intentionally into your work. First of all, who am I? This is me. I grew up in a small town in Georgia, and that will become interesting and important in the second body of work that I'll show you. But I'm from a rural Georgia. I am one of 7 kids, and I'm mother of 5 kids. And they're all in their 20s and 30s, and I now live in California. But I did grow up with this great love of storytelling. And I believe it's the essential way that we organize and make sense of ourselves and then the world around us. And I have particularly devoted all of my work to visual storytelling and using the power of visuals to communicate and improve the way we see and understand each other. So about 16 years ago, I started doing this kind of social documentary work. I have been shooting for large international aid organizations. I particularly gravitated because of some work I did with CARE International and the UN High Commission on Refugees to refugee work, but that's not all of what I've done. But the upshot is I've traveled a lot photographing in these areas, much of whom have been sort of greatly impacted by trauma or disruption of some sort. So I'm going to flip through these pretty quickly. They're in Kenya. One highlight for me personally was that this is 2009. I happened to be doing a photo shoot in Kenya and had the opportunity to go to the village Kumanga, which is the village in Western Kenya that Obama is from. And this was the day of his inauguration back in DC. So it was just a particularly crazy and exciting moment to be there. But like I said, my work started gravitating more and more towards play. And I began to think a lot about the fact that, and maybe it's my, maternal mother of five thing, but, I was there to photograph a certain thing on behalf of the NGOs, but I also couldn't help but notice that kids were playing everywhere. And I began to think of it as this notion of, if you expand the scope of your vision, you actually see much more of life and what is happening. And as I dug into the theory of play, I realized that one of the key components of play, and this is important to think about whether it's applied to our own life or in a home, abusive home for a child, or in a traumatic area, is that you cannot play unless you feel emotionally and physically safe. So one of the key things that these NGOs are doing is creating safe spaces for people to turn to what their bodies essentially know how to do, which is to adapt to the trauma that's happening around them through play. It's much harder for adults to get there, but kids get there very, very quickly.
So Nancy, as you started this journey, that it was wide open, but then play became part of this new calibration in your head. So it went from wide to very focused in a way that, it gave you your push to continue, or your push to understand that category of play.
Right. So I also was kind of doing a lot of research into play theory and academics and the developmental research that is happening around neurology and physicality and learning. But essentially what I would do is, if I would agree to go, I was doing a shoot in Kenya for the International Rescue Committee, I would build in the expectation that I would also be shooting this body of work on the side. So that, with the understanding that everything is, definitely captioned and appropriately directed towards where the situation was and what agency I was shooting on behalf of. But this is, for example, these are Rohingya refugee kids, and this is after the Rohingya huge crisis that happened there in 2017, where over 1 million people went over the border into Bangladesh within a period of 4 weeks. And so there was this mass focus on that part of the world by the large international organizations trying to build out infrastructure for these people. But meanwhile, this is what the kids are doing. And of course, the thing that is so cool and fun about play is that you know it immediately when you see it anywhere in the world. And a lot of it is very, very similar. So again, in this, and Liam, you spoke very nicely to the common humanity, the shared humanity. This became so obvious, that we're playing the same games, we're doing the same sorts of things. This is Kenya at a Kakuma refugee camp. Another thing I think is important to realize, that the United Nations has guaranteed play as a fundamental human right. So all the UN Millennial Development Goals, everything has to do with allowing kids time and space to play, and as a fundamental thing that we need to support. And I think every time I think about that notion, it makes me think too about, looking back on our society and whether we actually, as we are raising our kids and pushing our kids ever harder, whether we're actually giving them access to these fundamental human rights.
And Nancy, I mean, this has to end up being a huge flashback to you raising your own kids.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, that must come all the
Oh,
time.
for sure. Yeah. I mean, because I actually also would end up playing a lot. A lot of things that I would watch the kids doing, I would also try to do. This kid is juggling, for example, and it just was a really lovely thing. It also kind of warmed up the audience for me to photograph. But the kids, for example, in Burkina Faso had a very elaborate jacks game where they would throw a rock up and try to pick up 6 rocks under it. And I spent at least an hour trying to perfect my game doing that. And I never got that much better, but I immediately had this welcome audience, and it kind of made everything that came after that much easier.
And that's how does the body of work, like, how do you take this work and get it to a larger audience to bring value to it?
Mm-hmm. Well,
Because-
I will show you, and I think a
Okay.
few slides here. I have a book that I put this together in.
Great. Okay.
And it's sort of hold on to
continue.
that thought and I'll get there.
Okay.
But I do think one of the things that came to me as I was photographing this and looking, these are kids in Spain, these are kids in Panama, Haiti. Immediately, this was a week after this earthquake that had devastated 70% of the town that's right on the beach there, Leogan, where these kids are. And yet, here's what these kids are doing. This is, I'm interested in what they're doing.
Just one thought that becomes so important is the context of, like you just said, a week before there was an earthquake, and now these kids, it's an incredible thing, that spirit that kids have.
Yeah.
Right. And knowing the context, which I'm sure is in the book.
Yeah.
It gives it, like, your mind expands just
Right.
thinking.
And to jump to the headline is, what can we as adults learn from looking at pictures of kids at play, to sort of invert the notion of we are going to teach them something, and instead they are actually teaching us and reminding us that we all have known how to do this our whole lives.
Yeah.
And I think, I'll keep going and show you a few more images, but I think this is a really fun comparison. This is in Cuba. This is 2017. Very unusual to see a kid with a piece of technology there, but they're in a playground that's like huddled right up next to the US Embassy, so they can get some Wi-Fi there. And then this is some Mayan kids up in the hills of Honduras, and they're playing what we would look at and think of as tug of war, but it's also actually a very ancient Mayan game. These are kids, playing in cars in Montana and in Haiti. And then various, of course, the subject of toys and the things that kids choose to play with. These are kids collecting water, and which is immediately, they're diverting rainfall into a bucket, but it's immediately become a game. It's fun. I showed this work earlier today, coincidentally, to a group of 2nd graders, and they are studying play, and it was just so fun to hear how they reacted to it. So this is Sebastopol, California. This is in Bangladesh, Mexico, rural Mexico. And then I moved into this format for some of the work because I just wanted to play with perspective and just kind of give a different way of showing a portrait, and be again sort of underline that this work is playful. And ultimately in 2021, I published this book, which is a serious look at play and the idea that I've been promoting. And this is on exhibition, and it's traveling for the next couple of years, and it's moving in and out of play museums, children's hospitals. And I'm using it personally as a way just to connect with people around this subject, because it seems like it's a really salient time as the world around us kind of ramps up and gets a little bit more frightening and fearful, that play is just a fundamental tool for well-being and creativity. And so I'm using this as a platform to talk about it. So then I'll segue into the second body of work that I wanted to show, which is some thesis work that I did. I did an MFA in the spring of 2020. I had been accepted at Maine Media College to do an MFA. And I had this instinct that I needed to do less work for other people and find a structured way to bring play more actively into my work. Of course, we all know what happened in the spring of 2020, the COVID, the shutdown, and essentially all my kids started coming home. So that meant they came home with babies and dogs and cats and spouses and significant others. And, we had a lot, we had 1.9 people here in our house. And one of my kids had suggested, as we were working from home, trying to get used to this new platform called Zoom, that one of the critical problems was you're so tempted to check your social media or check your email. What do you do with your hands to keep your hands busy so that you're not doing that while you're on a business meeting? And we were suggesting knitting and shelling peas and doodling. And I started sewing. I'd done embroidery as a kid, but literally not again in 40 plus years, 50 years. But I started sewing on this picture of Grandma Richards. And she's got this rather large cabbage in front of her. And my idea was to print the photo, and I shared it with my kids, some of whom are are active gardeners and cooks. And I just thought it'd be fun that we all could sort of, develop a different concept of this work, cut it up, paint on it, do whatever. And what happened to me, though, is I began sewing on this, and it began to take on a new relevance, because not only was, as the pandemic ramped up, I realized that Grandma Richards was a survivor of the 1918 pandemic. But also, as this was the time when Biden had nominated Kamala Harris, and this was a New York Times headline that ambition has always been ladylike. And I immediately began to see this picture as a picture of ambition, a woman's ambition particularly, because Grandma Richards is actually here demonstrating that she is the winner of the giant cabbage contest in the Georgia State Fair in 1952. So she was actually, quite successful with this. But the other thing that became so fun about it for me, as I was just playing and sort of throwing different stuff down on it, is that it became an art object. Of course, the physicality of the photo did what photos always do, they're evidentiary, but also it became an artifact, it became a tangible relic. And the two-dimensionality of this was actually being brought into the present by this collage function of what I was doing. And so, long story short, I began to lean more and more to doing this kind of work, because concurrent with that, my ideas about the role of how we are documenting living in this extraordinary time were just being rattled. I was really concerned about, all the most important images of our time were flying past us and this ephemeral nature. So this idea of what does it mean that we don't have tangible artifacts? We don't have the photographs, we don't have the letters, we don't even have the newspapers to document living in this great health crisis. So what are we going to pass on to our grandchildren about to show how we adapted and lived through this crisis? And that led directly to this work, which is the body of work that I ended up spending 3 years working on. And it's my thesis work from Maine Media College. And this work is about memory and stories that we tell ourselves. And I'm using photography and collage and thread and beading and quilting to create a visual memoir of growing up in the South in the 1960s. So in essence, my focus on play as a method of creativity was actually leading me back, not just to my children's childhood, but actually to my own childhood. The themes that I decided to focus this body of work on were the history of segregation in the South, the culture that defined women and the idealization of women, and then the relationship with place. And I called this body of work Add, Mix, Fold, and it's based on this pound cake recipe, which is a metaphor for how we're adding and mixing and folding stories into memory to inform and make sense of our lives now. And in fact, being from the South, I think we're always doing this, and we have a whole nother level of sifting that we do as we bring in this historical legacy and try to understand the contradictions, the moral weight of that legacy, and decide what we are holding on to and what we're letting go of. It became very important to me that this work would be very tactile. I handcrafted, I call it undeniably human. I love that quote that I heard a year or so ago as we were sort of beginning to think about what is synthetic and AI imagery doing to the future of photography, and the idea that the opportunity to, in an increasingly synthetic world, is to be undeniably human. So I began to think of this work as multidimensional, undeniably human. The pieces are one of a kind. It's also a visual memoir. My goal here is not to tell everyone's story. It's simply to tell my own story and how I see the world. I wanted to literally use the threads as a way to create dimension and connection from the past to the present. And I also particularly focused on the 60s. I was born in 1961 in rural Georgia. And that was such a remarkable decade of change, of violence, of turbulence, of progress in America, perhaps maybe one of the most violent and disrupted decades that we've ever experienced. Although we could be living in one right now. But I found it kind of reassuring. There was something about, particularly if you think about where we were in 2020 and the election and racial justice issues and pandemic issues, that it was something kind of reassuring to look back on the 60s and also appreciate it as another very disrupted time. So what I'm going to do now is kind of move into these three themes, and I will sort of break them down and just show you a couple of images and a little bit about the way that I thought about the art and the presentation of the ideas. This first is this theme of historical segregation that is so present in our lives in the South. So with this work, I was trying to better understand the water my family was swimming in. We were a white, conservative, privileged family living in a small town in Georgia, and all the contradictions that we were living with that had to do with, how we thought about our democratic and moral values that were taught to us in our families and our churches and our schools, but yet in obvious contradiction to our everyday lives. This was a master's thesis, so I spent a lot of time reading about Southern identity and the literature of the South. I mean, the South is all of these issues that have to do with the South are, of course, very well documented, both in the arts, visual arts, as well as writing. And one of the things that resonated with me that I had not been familiar with before is something called the Southern rage to explain. So this idea that Southerners feel like they need to explain what side of this issue that they're on. We're either in a position of defiance, like the lost cause mythology of the gallantry of the South, or shame. Apologists burdened by the guilt, and sometimes it's paralyzing. This piece in particular was inspired by a quilt, and it has both a contemporary photo at the bottom and then a older family photo at the top. And it's multi-dimensional. I don't know if you can see it very well, but it has buttons and it has thread, and it actually has I was thinking of a quilt, so it's kind of padded in there as well. What happened in the 1960s is that in 1964, the civil rights act was passed, and then the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965. And suddenly all the racial hierarchies that had defined everything that about the way we socialized and lived suddenly became illegal. And it turned out that race riots began to break out in Los Angeles, in Detroit, in New York. And it became clear that racism was not just a Southern problem, it's actually an American problem. And of course, 60 years later, we're continuing to struggle with it, and we continue to have laws that are not equally applied, and we continue to have trouble talking about it. So the context for my art here is looking for a language to talk about that. A couple of other pieces that are in this chapter, if you will, is this is a postcard that I found that was from 1952, and it was a prospective postcard where they were imagining the carving. It's a Mount Rushmore size carving on the side of Stone Mountain, which is this mountain and park that's just north of Atlanta, where they carved in this giant statue of the Confederate war generals. And so here I am, for example, using a tintype that I found and some stitching and threading to reimagine how we might create monument differently now. And then this one is, I don't know if you can see it very well, but I'll just kind of walk you through it because it's inspired by Dwayne Michaels, who many of you may know loves to write on photos. And his idea is the writing tells you something that the photo can't tell you. Like you don't know from looking that just outside this photo, such and such is going on. So I've applied that idea to this family photo because family photos are, there's a whole body of history and study around family photos. And the idea is that it brings our adult view, our adult selves, back into a childhood world and seems to give us both concrete evidence that look how simple life was and everything was very orderly and bucolic. But also maybe suggests that maybe if we look hard at it, we can figure out how we have come to be who we are. I spent a lot of time reading the historians Annette Kuhn and Marianne Hirsch, who believe that family photos reveal so much that if we pay attention to what they are pointing to just outside the frame, we will understand the context of the consciousness around it, essentially, which makes them very alive. And of course, we continue to look back on these photos and think, here's my relationship with that person. That was before such and such happened. I no longer speak to that person anymore. So what this is an imagining of that. So this is my family in 1963, a backyard scene. I know that my mom is pregnant with her fourth child. I know that I am 2 years old. I know that Lurleen, who is our nanny here, was 19 and had just started working with our family. I also know that Martin Luther King had been in the Birmingham jail that year and had written the letter, the famous, letters from the Birmingham jail. He also had been in the Washington Mall and did his I Have a Dream speech. I know that George Wallace was 2 hours away over in Montgomery, and he was railing about segregation now, segregation forever. I know that our community was really dragging its feet. It had been 10 years since Brown versus Board of Education was passed. And, they weren't, we still hadn't integrated schools. That was a subject of great contention. And then we know, of course, that the president was shot and killed in November of 1963. So the suggestion with this work is just all these things would have been in the consciousness of these adults. This photo points to that. And it's just a new, a really interesting way, I think, to look at family photos and to keep them very much alive, because we're constantly relating our contemporary lives back into that photo.
So Nancy, I mean, that's of course incredibly interesting. Is that something that we can do today? As we see a photograph of, you name the topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
To give it a context that will live forever. Is that in the captions in our brains already because we think differently than we did back then?
I think it's because your relationship is changing constantly with what the photo is documenting, right? So even from yesterday to today, I may say, oh, well, I just saw my brother this weekend in North Carolina, the one right there in the yellow and the red shorts. Or I just realized that this is the anniversary of the birth control pill that was introduced this year, and that was, changed life for women. So the idea is that time is actually the element in the context that makes these photos alive.
Right. But a piece of that is nostalgia,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And a piece of it is the eyes that we look at it, because somebody could look at any photograph with their own set of eyes and see something completely different. I mean, some facts will have to remain the same. The
Mhm.
Kennedy assassination, the speech, all of that. But there are other pieces which sort of makes it even more fascinating, that whatever you look at, whatever your history is, you bring to the interpretation of that photograph.
Right,
Right.
right.
Or if
That's
you give us the day, if you give us the year, we could then do, make those quotes that you have around there somewhat different.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's just a really rich, interesting way of bringing dimensionality. The fourth dimension is time, right? And so if you bring actually that level of dimensionality to it, as you're constantly sort of revisiting, the photo book stays very much alive.
Right.
So I just think it's a fun way to look at it.
Yeah. And one other thing I just wanted to
Yeah.
get out of my brain is that, you're speaking in front of different audiences,
Mhm.
which has got to be really intriguing for you, to showing that other work to those little kids,
Yeah,
and how different it is to show it to us, or university students, or
Yeah.
whomever you're showing it to. That's got to be very, very challenging for you in the most wonderful way.
Oh, in a wonderful way. I told these second graders today, I said, tonight I'm going to talk to a bunch of adults and I'm going to tell them why they should be paying attention to how children are playing, because you
Right.
guys are showing us how to play,
Right. Yeah.
So yeah.
I didn't
So
mean to interrupt.
I love speaking about the work, and
Yeah.
I'll pick up our pace here, because this is this is the second chapter, if you will, which is a focus on the idealization of women. And the 60s was just this time of dramatically evolving culture about women in society, and the ideal woman. And suddenly women were armed with a pill. They had wartime work experiences. They were demanding equal pay in Congress, which was an audacious idea. In 1963, Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, was written, and she began to sort of pop the myth of the happy housewife at home. And this is a sweater of my mom's that I stitched inside, and I riffed off of this ad with Annette Funicelli on, advertising the birth control pill. And the other thing that was huge in the 60s is media, and visual media specifically, not just the camera, but visual media was predominant all of a sudden in American lives, and was driven by the fact that in the early 60s, the majority of American households had television. So this is the whole birth of the media theory, and Marshall McLuhan, who promoted this idea that it is less important. The media, the idea was that the media, I'm just spacing out on what is anyway, he was promoting the idea that it's less important what the content is, and what is more important, that it's a platform that it's on.
The media is the message.
The media is a message. Thank you. Just space that out. Yeah. So the idea is just that now our contemporary version of that would be Twitter or something, right? So the format of the visual media at the time was so compelling that people would watch it no matter what it was. And that was a new concept as we were sort of distributing visual media at scale, because of printing technique and the reach of television. And then also this booming consumer culture. And, if anybody is fans of Eggleston's work, they'll know that he photographed advertising culture in the South, particularly lovely way. But it was ubiquitous and pervasive on a scale that no one had ever seen before. And Mad Men, which was a favorite TV show of mine, was perfectly about this, because it became, this was also how the idea of the perfect woman was crafted. So it came to be later in the early 70s described as the male gaze. But we recognize what that means is that male advertising executives in the 60s were sort of defining women as sexy and dependent, happily waiting at home for their man to come home. And this piece is called The Pearl Clutch, and I just wanted to examine the traditional tropes of femininity that were coming under attack. And then this one is Esquire magazine, 1967. And I don't know if you can see that, but it says the headline is "The New American Woman Through at 21." So as a child, a girl growing up, these were the messages surrounding us. It was a very confusing time to be a girl. But I also had other models for femininity, and particularly in literature. And I referenced Nancy Drew. So this is a picture of my aunt from the 1930s who was named Nancy. And then I did a eraser technique on an excerpt from a Nancy Drew book. And I call this piece The Two Nancys. And it was interesting because Nancy Drew was originally published in the 1930s, but it had been recently updated around the time that I was born. So she was, everybody I knew wanted to be Nancy Drew, but particularly because we shared the name. I loved Nancy Drew. She was this fearless girl detective. She solved every problem in the community, and big or small, she had a solution. She was independent, she was graceful, she was clever, and she was a symbol of feminism before I knew what that meant. And then another big literary hero for me was Scarlett O'Hara from Gone with the Wind. And this is on the left, this is an excerpt, again, eraser from a page of Gone with the Wind, and then a photo with it's presented as the handkerchief is literally hanging on her face. And this novel, originally written in 1936, was actually the classic handbook for this lost cause defiant mythology of the South shall live again, the moonlight and magnolia idea of this romanticization of plantation life and Civil War and all of that. And it now is, of course, deeply both revered and reviled. It's under heavy, heavy criticism for that sort of simplistic presentation that is really unpalatable for most of us now. But in my day, Scarlett was the icon for white Southern womanhood. She was defiant, she was sexy, she was stubborn. In hoop skirts and a handful of dirt, she could get almost anything done. And then I made the leap to Joan Didion. And now, of course, living in California, I'm a huge Joan Didion fan. But as I began to work on this in the spring of 2020, I turned again and again to Joan Didion, who was raising these ideas about, I'm talking here about a time when I was doubting the premise of all the stories that I had ever been told. She was a journalist who had this unusual style of memoir journalism, and she covered the 1960s and early 70s in America through that lens. And a book that I spent a lot of time with is called The White Album. And the first line in that book is, "We tell ourselves stories in order to live." She was documenting what she called just an intentionally disjointed society. And she was trying to make sense of it by simply saying, this is the way it looks to me. And then quickly, the last piece of this is focusing on place, thinking about place both very expansively, but also home. Because in the middle of COVID, I had the opportunity to go back to this home that we grew up in, which here I've sort of particularly kind of saturated and made it look kind of idealized. It is a mid-century modern house that my parents built in 1956. It was a 2-bedroom house and they went on to have 7 children. So they built, it's on a farm in Georgia, and they built a bigger house next door, but this is the house that we grew up in, and it still sits abandoned for now 25 years. And it's in terrible shape, and I have this fear that it's going to be torn down, but it's become a big sort of grounding point for me with this work. It's raising a lot of questions about permanence and continuity. This is my mother's camellia bush that used to be sort of 3 feet high, but now has grown to take over the house. And these are other pictures of the house.
Yeah. So Nancy, how do you allow that, being that you're so connected to these types of things, how do you allow that house to get there, to get into that space?
Well,
How do you utter the words? How do you utter the words that they'll tear it down?
yeah, the reason, first of all, I think it's in really bad shape. And so it would take a lot of money to fix it up, and it belongs to my sister. So she just lets me come there and photograph it. And I've just been really moved by something that the house feels like it's communicating with me. In fact, my next project, I think, is going to be work on this house, because I just feel like I really want to go deeper into studying memories and relationship with place. And for me, what comes up is that even this house seems really alive also with these memories. But of course, like the South itself, it's not the same place at all. So, and then the last thing I'll mention is that I have been really fascinated with all the writing and the understanding about memory and photography, because they are both, at best, imperfect versions of truth. And even that we all know that photographs supplant memories. Like we might think of, our kindergarten graduation, but we actually don't have a memory of it. We're thinking of the photos. And as photographers, we understand, it's completely our discretion how we compose the image and what is left in and what is left out because of the story that we want to tell. But what's interesting to appreciate is, just like photographs, neurology teaches us that our memory is also not perfect. It's not a retrieval process. It is constantly being assembled, much like that picture that we looked at as we look into the past and we're bringing our present context into the old past. Our memory works exactly the same way. So we don't have original memories filed away somewhere waiting to be retrieved. The act of remembering is actually an act of reassembling. For me, I interpret it as quilting, collaging, bringing other elements in. So it's given me this whole encouragement, I guess, and excitement about working in this space. And so this is part of the work I'm doing. And then I'll just say, to wrap up here, that I just remember to play. Creativity and taking risks. Spontaneity is one of the most powerful tools that we have for creativity. We should use it all the time. Remember to work in the things that are close to you. Having traveled through 14, 15 countries, far away, I'm so excited at this point in my life to be working on this work that's just mine, and it's right in front of me, and it's right here and right now. I have been really interested to read what Rick Rubin has been saying about his book on creativity, which is, consider your art as an energy that's alive in you, and think of yourself as you grab your camera and you go out to shoot, or you come into your studio, that I'm just here to create, and this is what I'm going to do. And then finally, keep making art, because the point of all of this art is we're trying to move people. Liam said that very eloquently in his work. I think we can't bring we can't solve world peace, but we can actually appreciate the aesthetic power of people as they look at images to be moved even ever so slightly. And that's the most undeniably human part of us. And this is what this work is dedicated to. So.
Wow. Thank you so much. That was really, it was a lesson.
No, sorry, it's very academic. It's very thesis oriented, but
No, it's wonderful. It's like all good stories, it makes you think, right? And that's the idea. And you also, Nancy, you have to look into the chat room. There's a lot of beautiful comments
oh, good.
of your work. Yeah, just
Right.
very, very nice. So what's next for you?
I actually I have two projects, but I'm going to work in that house in Carrollton and go back and
Yeah.
just spend time there. And I'm trying to think of, a creative way to come into it. But then another thing is I'm very interested in text and imagery, and I have my next project. I already know what the name of it is. I just haven't executed much on it yet, but it is called In My Head, I Still Speak Southern. And it's bringing together Southern colloquialisms and Southernisms, which are so rich from my growing up, into imagery and just playing with that notion of how they key off each other.
Yeah, that's that's a great idea. Just the words themselves, right? What
Yeah.
kind of images, yeah. And Liam, what's next for you?
Going to London on Friday, but beyond that, I don't know, to be honest.
Okay, good.
I'm working. I mean, that's good, but yeah, I mean, I don't. I mean, I want to continue with this work, but I want to try and maybe expand it into some, apply it to different, maybe commercially that would be great, but also possibly beyond the beach into.
And Nance, so do you sell this work? Sell any of these prints? You're selling books, right? Where can we
Right.
buy your book?
You can buy the book on my website or Amazon. It's called Potential Space. But I would love it if you bought it on my website, because I've still got another 150 in my basement that I need.
Okay.
And I'll sign it and send it off to you. But I'm beginning to think of a way. Each one of these pieces is so labor intensive that I've sort of thought of them as one of a kind. But I've had some interest in selling them, and so I'm just beginning to think that maybe I do really small editions of a few of them, like the Nancy Drew portrait where I've written the first chapter,
Right.
Nancy Drew all over her face and embroidery done. But they're each, it's a lot of work, and I'm also excited to do new work. So.
Right.
Mhm.
Forever the dilemma to get organized, to be thinking commercially, right?
Yeah.
Is that's always the challenge for artists.
Yeah.
Right. It just is. I mean, emotionally, can you give them away? I mean, not give them away. Can you sell them?
It's a good question. I don't know. I haven't really faced that yet. My immediate answer has just been no. But I think if I, to pick 3 or 4 and just create them as pieces that would be sold.
Right.
That's the way I'm thinking about doing it.
Yeah. How about you, Liam?
What's that about? What? Sorry.
About selling prints.
Well, I've been in a few shows with this work, and I actually put not for sale. I don't know why I do that. I partly because I don't know. I think the value it hasn't really. I've got to create the whole body of work before I think it comes together as something that I don't know. I mean, it just seems so weird to sell it. I don't know.
I have to tell you, from a photo rep standpoint, you two are my nightmare.
Well,
an absolute nightmare.
I was thinking about what you were saying about artists. You were absolutely right, but that's why you have But the thing is, it's about you got to focus on the work. Like it's all about focusing on, and then you think about that later, right? But do the work. That's what I always say.
Right, but the later seems too long. Is really the point. but I get it. I mean, that's why everyone loves an artist. I mean, I get it completely. Yeah.
It's so separate, that's all. It just seems
Yeah,
like a separate process.
it is a separate head.
Yeah.
Completely a separate head. But yeah, I mean, as you guys can see from the chat room, everyone is just singing you praises and loves the work. I mean, this was really a beautiful night. I cannot thank you both enough for coming in and speaking with. If anyone has any questions, raise your hand. Now would be the time. But yeah, this is wonderful. And I always say, Nancy and Liam knows, you have a standing offer. Come back, show us new work, show us, what you're doing. We always want you to come back.
I would like to thank everyone who's written comments, because it is, to Liam's point earlier, you're kind of in a vacuum doing this work, and it's so fun to put it out and get some reaction. So thank you for just even the comments. It's really, it's a great encouragement. So appreciate it.
Just keep, and what's nice about both of you guys is your thought process behind it. That's really what gets everybody. You could feel people thinking creatively. Because your point is right on, Nance. Everyone's in a vacuum, and you're not sure if you're doing something right or wrong, or should I go left or right, and then there you are shooting kids because it's important for them to play.
Mhm.
I mean, like what a simple, fascinating idea that is. It's really wonderful. And this, same thing with you, Liam. Going back to Coney Island and those people and shooting the same, real people around the world is really motivating.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, it's really motivating.
The process is very, it's has to be from within, right? And so to do, you have to go and discover, it's a journey, right? And so it's like with play, right? To discover concepts, right? That's the artistic process, and so that has to be done on your own effectively. And then from there, this is why this is great, to actually show it, and you get, as you said, you don't really know, right?
And for both of you to have this long-term commitment to what it is you're doing, right? Because there's so many obstacles and there's always some doubt along the way, right? To have the conviction to say, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
I'm going to get to the other side, right? That's really the magic of all of it.
Yeah.
Say.
Absolutely. I keep seeing myself carrying the light on my shoulder, along it's like what, the silhouette of the old man walking down the beach with his.
I tell you, Nancy, I would pay admission to hear your speech to those kids today. I would love to hear the version of that versus what you did tonight. That's got it. I mean, that's like a Fellini movie. If you put those two things together, I mean, how intriguing would that be?
That's a really good point. I also just feel like, for me, I mean, I said this before, but I'll just underscore it. We live in a time where we don't have images in our lives beyond our screen. And so I'm going to show you, I have taken this even as far as, if you can see my jeans, two pictures of my jeans. One is me and one is my 3-year-old granddaughter. But I just feel like we need to be, I don't know, we're printing out these images, you're bringing them to life outside of our screens. Because I do really think about the fact that, 50 years from now, what are people going to be looking at that gives some sense of what we're going through? Because we're living in an extraordinary time right now. Yeah. And our tangible elements are gone.
Glenn has a question. Go, Glenn.
Oh, thank you, Frank. It was an incredible evening, as it always is, as I said in the comment. I have less of a question and really a couple of just quick things. Liam, we've known each other for a while. I think I've told you this. I can't hammer it into your head enough that you have to share that work. As a creative director for decades, I can promise you that the first thing that I look at, I go to the personal work first, and then I look at their commercial work. So if by leaving it out, you're leaving out a huge gap. I can tell you that as a fact. That's not an opinion, that so many other creative directors do the same, by design. So I would ask you to try to think about that. I'm not even happy to help you, or I know Frank would, but if you want another set of eyes, I'd be more than happy to tell you what kind of a section you might have on your site. And then Nancy, the only other thing I wanted to ask you was, your storytelling is riveting. Have you ever considered, like, the one image that I just couldn't stop looking at, which was the old photograph of you and your family, with the threads that came off it, and then the information around it. That can be almost a documentary in its own right. I don't mean just that image, but I mean, if you pushed out that whole story, have you ever considered that? Because your storytelling is amplifies the whole concept so beautifully. That's something I would want to see, you know what I mean? Because it's so deep and so, and so interesting in a way, so beyond the image. It's sort of literally, I'm saying a pun on purpose, but it unravels the whole concept and the whole, the past and the future and the present and all that. It would just be fascinating to see it.
No, thank you for the idea. I've just been focused on cranking it out. And I've just shown it. For example, I've got it opened in Charlotte, North Carolina this weekend. It was my first time to show it in the South. So I was really excited about that opportunity. So I really, the point of the work is actually, these are things that are really hard to talk about. And I feel like art has this extraordinary ability to give us some language. Just tell your own story and put it out there. So this is the world that I'm wading into, but I appreciate that idea.
Yeah, Glenn, it reminds me of that shot on 9/11 that was across the river, and there were like 5 young people with their bicycles, right? And they were just sitting around chatting, right? And somebody wrote that these kids were not caring about, and they were adults, they weren't kids, they were like 30-year-olds, right? And they were just, the buildings are on fire, and whoever wrote the piece never spoke to the kid, to these young adults, but they said, "Oh, look at this! This is the youth. They don't care. They're just, taking in the sun on a normal September 11th day." When they in fact interviewed those people later on, it couldn't have been more different. In the context of your photo there, Nance, you can see how that can go. So that's why I said can go so many different ways. But I don't know who took that photograph. I think it was an Italian guy. I remember. But I'm sure if you Google it, that will come up as an example of what you're seeing is not what you're really seeing.
Nancy, the thing, I'll just leave you with this. You spent quite a bit of time on that image and worked on it, obviously, and the depth of it. As I said in the comments on the side, there's a billion images that are going through the interwaves here, daily. They have almost no meaning after a while because they're moving at the speed of light, literally. And to hang on an image for a while and just rest on it and talk about it, I just haven't heard that in a long time, because we're all staring at screens, thumbing through things at a mile a minute, so I wonder if it's really important that we stop, and Liam's work as well. You stop and really look into the eyes and the faces and the wrinkles and the, warts and all on some of the subject matter, and not just rifle through it.
Yeah.
Very important as it goes faster and faster and more images are being, jammed, through the airwaves.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. And, my approach is also to put some stitching or make something dimensional in it, because to show it as something that's actually been hand touched. Because I think it's getting harder and harder to tell what's real. It's not.
Really interesting concept.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Glenn.
Yeah.
So again, I thank everyone for coming in, and what we always like to do, Nancy and Liam, is let the artist have the last word. So Liam, you go first.
Oh God, what to say? Just thank you, Frank, for letting me do this. And personal work is absolutely very important. And anyways, thank you. I don't know what to say.
All right, that's it. Nance?
I would just build on that and say thank you for the privilege of a place to show personal work, but also for the community that you've created. I think we've learned over these last few years that these kinds of forums, and it's too bad we're not live, but there's a benefit of also this platform that we have to exchange ideas and encourage each other on and give our hand at the back. It's just vital. So it's really important and exciting that you're doing this, and thanks for your perseverance and continue.
We will, and you should know within a week or so, this will all be up on our YouTube channel. So you send folks who weren't able to join to catch us there. And next week we have a terrific photographer, Peter Turnley, will be presenting next Wednesday. So again, I thank you both so much for coming on and doing this, and a standing invitation to come back. Buy Nancy's book from her directly.
Nancy, it's nancyfarese.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, buy it from her, not from Amazon. And that'll all be good. And so, guys, whenever you think of it and you have new work, please come back, show us. We'd love to have you. And I thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Bye.
And thanks, Francis, for for making this all happen as well.